Cool. Yep, my name is Steven. And I'm just wondering how important it is to have clarity on the fact that we cannot assume that we're going to double offshore oil and gas production by 2030, and having clarity on something like a moratorium or something like provincial government clarity that this industry is gonna shift. I'm seeing in my own province in Nova Scotia conversations around the just transition for workers in the coal sector not happening the way that they should be because our government is sort of pretending like it's not going to happen and we're going to burn coal till 2040. So I am wondering how important that is to make this conversation on just transition a bit more immediate and real.
I can start. I think part of it for us, especially in the labor movement, is that we recognize that there's a leadership role for labor in this conversation, and to get the workers, government especially, and the business side and community at the table. I mean, you have to. There are difficult discussions. For those groups to have, but they're even more difficult for the individual worker and their family and the community. There's a leadership role here for labor. We see that. There's a leadership role for government and that sort of thing. I think for Newfoundland and Labrador, getting our politicians to openly have that discussion and acknowledge that, maybe the golden age of fossil fuel may be past or passing us by. That's a hard realization, no different than it was a hard realization in Alberta, and it still is. Now they've got someone there that is never going to probably acknowledge that. And as it was for workers in the coal sector in our country, in Alberta, New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, and Nova Scotia. And the unions representing those workers played a significant role in educating and creating a level of knowledge and awareness with those workers and the communities they lived in that this can happen in a just and equitable and fair way. But it's a difficult discussion to not only start but to have. But it has to happen.
So, do you have anything you'd like to add there?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, the short answer to your question is super important to have that acknowledged. When we're addicted to something, the first step is to admit it, and then to say we need to switch direction. And as I said before, it's not about turning off the taps overnight, but it is being clear with people about the U-turn that we now have to make and the new direction we have to be on. And maybe I can just conclude at this point about leadership. This is why leadership matters. That's why it's so important that you've got leaders like Kerry or Gil in Alberta, labor leaders who are having a truthful conversation with their members about the inevitability of the transitions that are happening and what's actually happening in the international fossil fuel marketplace. I've interviewed a ton of politicians and political insiders for my book, and one of the frustrating things is that when you're talking with almost all of them, in one way or another, they come back to some version of the line that says, you have to meet people where they're at. But what strikes me about the leaders we remember from World War II is that they didn't actually meet people where they were at. They took people where they needed to go. And that kind of leadership is about telling people the truth. And that's what we need to do.